Started. Again, welcome to office hours for ESG and ESG-CV. My name is Shavonna McCaleb, and I am today's moderator. If you are just joining us, please go to the chat and introduce yourself with your name and the region you represent. As a reminder, this office hours session is being recorded for public record. How to ask a question. All questions must be submitted in the chat box. Please type your organization and question into the chat box. The team will read questions out loud at the end of the presentation and will provide answers, if possible, throughout the presentation. All questions and answers entered into the chat box will be recorded as part of the public record. Both the slides and recording will be sent to all participants within 1 week of this event. Agenda: ESG updates and resources, ESG CV updates, office hour updates, ESG CV Q&A, spotlight series, coordinated entry system cohort groups preview. And now I will hand it over to Anthony.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just one quick update today. We're still processing the BOS 2023 ESG annual NOFA applications. And as you can see on the slide, we say anticipated in January, February. So I'm going to go out on a limb since it's January 31st and say that it's going to be in early February. We will have an update for you on that next week. And if we could go to the next slide. Along those lines, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to your annual ESG rep listed there, Diana, Sam, Giovanni, Tuesday, and myself. And there's always the catch-all ESG NOFA inbox listed at the bottom of the slide. And with that, I will turn it back to Shavonna. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. ESG CV update. Reminders for performance milestones. ESG CV 1 and ESG CV 2 allocation agreements expired on December the 31st, 2023. ESG CV additional funds timeline. The final drawdown deadline is March 31st, 2024. Final RFF must be submitted by April the 15th, 2024. And the agreement expiration date is June 30th, 2024. February office hour topics. On 2/7, client file checklist. 2/14, emergency and night-by-night shelter. 2/21, indirect costs. 2/28, ESG monitoring checklist. And new CA-HCD Tribal Nations Toolkit. Are there any questions at this time? Okay, if not, we will move on. How to contact us. If you have any further questions, please contact us and your ESG. Please reach out to your ESG representative or ESG NOFA at hcd.ca.gov. And for ESG CV, please reach out to your grant administrator. Let's now turn our attention to today's Spotlight Series, introducing the CES Cohort Series, featuring Christiana Osway from ICF and Mindy Mitchell from Homebase. Christiana, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Shavonna. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christiana Osway. I'm a Nigerian-American woman. I'm originally from New Jersey. I currently live in the beautiful windy city of Chicago. I'm a TA provider with ICF, but prior to working at ICF, I worked in a local quasi-government nonprofit agency in New Jersey. I worked at the direct service provider level, but always with a role in system leadership at the same time for quite some time before officially transitioning fully into what I call my HUD role. of coordinated entry system manager. So at the same time, I also chaired our COC Data and System Improvement Committee, and I acted as our HIMIS lead for some time. You will hear me say HIMIS if you are on here. If you ever interact with me in any TA space, you will hear me say HIMIS. It's the running joke. I'm trying to make it a national thing, so feel free to steal that. But essentially, I mean HMIS for everyone else. And so I will throw it to Mindy to introduce herself.
Thanks, Christiana, and everybody. I know a lot of you already because we've been doing these awesome webinars and trainings for a long time with ESGCV, and really glad to be a part of that. Mindy Mitchell from Homebase. And because Christiana brought up HIMIS, I'll mention, if I haven't to the whole big group, I started this work in Mobile, Alabama as a case manager, and we called it HIMIS in Mobile, Alabama. So the Jersey girls weren't the only ones, but I have been thoroughly submersed in HMIS now for many years. So that's you'll get there, Christiana, is what I'm trying to say.
Or
welcome, everybody.
I am, so.
Yeah.
All right. So before we even dive into the content for today, I want to actually throw it back to you, Mindy, to talk a little bit about your experience with coordinated entry. As I mentioned, my role was kind of sitting as the coordinated entry system manager. That wasn't my official title, but again, that was my HUD role, right? And so HUD designates like 3 entity bodies that generally govern a robust coordinated entry system. And those bodies are management, policy and oversight, and evaluation. And so you may not necessarily know what your HUD role is, but we have 2 of those represented between Mindy and I. And so I just want to throw it back to Mindy real quick to talk about her HUD role being on the policy and oversight side.
So I was never that HUD role in an actual COC, but I did a lot of policy work at the national level. And I have been doing this long enough that I was part of the before coordinated entry life and then the after coordinated entry life, which is also before Hearth Act, after Hearth Act. So I also bring to this kind of conversation about coordinated entry, thinking about the why we do it. And like any policy, some stuff works well when we try to solve a problem, and some stuff needs some working out. So we're working out a lot of things on coordinated entry, and that will be part of the motivation for doing this training series that we're going to tell you guys about.
Awesome. And so my experience, I was directly in the working it out side of the work, just being on the management side of it and being on the operations side of it. So you'll kind of get the best of both worlds here from both of our perspective. And Shavana, you can feel free to take us to the next slide. All right. So today we intend to be quite conversational, quite colloquial. You will probably see Mindy and I banter quite a bit. And so we do want this to be interactive. And so please feel free to chime into the conversation by putting any input, questions, thoughts, ideas that come to mind in the chat. And Chris, do you mind just keeping an eye out on the chat for us just to make sure that we're capturing everything that's in there? Awesome. And so today we're going to be talking about, we're going to give you an overview actually of what we're spotlighting today, which is the Coordinated Entry System Cohort Series. We're going to be launching that next month. And so we want to just let you guys know a little bit about that. Then we're going to talk through some common misunderstandings about coordinated entry. And with that, present to you just some ways that you might be able to think through and understand coordinated entry. And then give you the floor to really tell us what you want to explore in this cohort series that we hope to provide. And then at the end, we will give you the most important part of today, which are some feline updates. And you will get the opportunity to vote on kind of a mascot for this series. And so stay And Shavana, you can take us to the next slide now. All right.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Mindy, do you want to start with this?
No, go ahead. I was going to put something in the chat, but go ahead.
Okay, awesome. All right. So we will be hosting a coordinated entry system cohort training series starting in February. Super excited about it. And so throughout this presentation, we're kind of going to be highlighting certain things, but we really won't be able, just for the sake of time, to go into depth. And so if you hear anything that is of interest to you, this is your opportunity to go. These cohort trainings would be your opportunity to go more in depth with us. And so in cohort 1, we're going to be talking about coordinated entry fundamentals. In cohort 2, we're going to be talking about prioritization and assessment. And then in cohort 3, we're going to be talking about some special topics. And so those special topics are going to be vastly informed by our conversation today and by whatever kind of comes out of this conversation. And so please do give us your thoughts and opinions. If anything has been kind of troubling you in the area of coordinated entry, we definitely want to hear about that, because those are some topics and things that we hope to cover through this series. And so as you can see, all of the sessions will take place on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. beginning February 6th. And so because of the way that we kind of framed it out, you have the opportunity to participate in one cohort or multiple cohorts. So you can feel free to register for all of them. If all of these topics are interesting for you, you can also feel free to designate certain staff persons to go to cohort 1 and cohort 2 and cohort 3. And Mindy is going to talk a little bit more about that later on in our presentation, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But yeah, our hope is that you really do find this training series valuable, and we hope that even our session today just sparks your interest, and that even as we're talking, you will click on the links that Mindy just dropped in the chat and sign up to spend more time with us, because we are great. And coordinated entry is also great.
So are cats.
And so are cats. Yes.
Yes.
And so, Shavana, you can take us to the next slide,
Yeah.
and I will give it to Mindy to take us from here.
Okay, so we are going to do, but we wanted to kick this off because we always are in continuous quality improvement mode. There's always some new stuff to learn. There's always some misunderstandings. And we wanted to start with an activity to just kind of get an idea about where folks are. And this will be a fun little true and false activity. So we have some statements here about coordinated entry. And these we came up with as just a really good conversation that Christiana and I had about, like, in the work that we've done around coordinated entry, some common misunderstandings. So these are true, false. And I believe Kristen is going to launch for each of these a poll that you guys can answer. So get ready. The first statement is prevention and diversion are a part of coordinated entry systems. True or false? Oh, okay. We're doing them all at once. Okay. The second statement is coordinated entry systems can have multiple access sites. True or false? Third is the assessment is the same as a housing application in coordinated entry. The fourth statement is that HUD requires us to use the VI SPDAT. The fifth statement, who is prioritized for housing today, might change tomorrow in a coordinated entry system. And finally, the coordinated entry system process creates housing. So these are all, again, some common misconceptions in the work that we've done that we see around coordinated entry. And we wanted to get from you guys a sense of your perspectives on these statements. So just respond true or false in the poll/quiz that Kristen has put up. And Kristen, I won't be able to see the process. So just let us know when it's complete.
Sure. People are still answering, so I haven't ended the poll yet.
Okay, great.
But now it looks like we've slowed down, so I'm going to go ahead and end it and share it.
Okay. All right. Okay, I can see the results now. So let's kind of just have a little conversation here. So Christiana, that first one, this was one that when you and I were talking came up a lot. And this is prevention and diversion are part of a coordinated entry system. So the vast majority of our attendees today thought this was a true statement. So I'm going to kick this one to you to give us some color commentary on.
This is quite interesting. I actually was not expecting that, but this statement is actually not true. This is false. And so prevention and diversion are what I would call adjacent to coordinated entry, right? They interact with coordinated entry, but technically they're a part of the larger homeless response system and not necessarily part of coordinated entry. In other words, they don't your coordinated entry system can function without having a prevention model or a diversion model. However, they are best practices, right? And so we know, even particularly during COVID, a lot of ESG CV funding went towards prevention, right? And so people were able to allocate more dollars than they were usually able to house individuals that may have experienced evictions or, may have been on the verge of becoming homeless, but weren't necessarily right there. And so I think for some time, it did create this little misconception that coordinated entry included prevention, right? And particularly for diversion, a lot of people incorporate diversion practices into their access and assessment models. And so I think sometimes too, that also is what adds to that misunderstanding and integration of the two into coordinated entry, but technically they are outside systems.
Thank you. Okay, the next one, coordinated entry systems can have multiple access sites. Most of you got this one right. Yes, it absolutely can have multiple access sites. I would also say it's a best practice to have multiple access sites. We want to make sure, especially as a matter of addressing racial disparities and ensuring that everyone that needs to access homelessness resources is thinking about having access sites in places either virtually or physically, that the people we most want to serve with our scarce resources are able to access it. So that one was pretty easy one. Good job, everybody. Okay. Oh my goodness, we had 100% on this one, Christiana. The assessment is the same as a housing application, 100% false. And you all are 100% right. Talk about that one a little bit, Christiana, because that's another one that you had some experience with where there were kind of misconceptions.
Yeah, I think this one is probably more of a misconception among the persons being served. And so I'm
Yeah.
super happy that everyone clicked false for this one, because we should know that, right? We should know that filling out an assessment is not a guarantee to housing. But I think sometimes when you're sitting with a person that is experiencing homelessness and you're asking them all of these questions about their housing situation, and you're really getting into the weeds of what is going on with them and what they need, they might assume that the result of this is going to be housing, whereas we know that's not necessarily the case. And I think that's going to come up in our next slide too, where we talk about how that plays into just some other misunderstandings around coordinated entry too. But super happy everyone got that one. Whew.
Yeah, and this will be the reason why we wanted to start this with just like this kind of conversation is we're really plugging these cohorts as we're having these conversations today, and really talking through kind of how these issues can come up in a community. We're really important part of thinking about you're building your coordinated entry. You want to make sure that people who are accessing the homelessness system and that need housing resources understand what's happening, and that we don't make it so complicated and so confusing, and also don't mislead people about what is going to happen as a result of filling out this application. So that'll be a really important session that we do, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, next one. Oh, this is a juicy one. This one came from me. HUD requires us to use the VI SPDAT. Yeah, we got almost 70%. That's good. Know that this is false. But we still have a lot of folks that think this is true. And this is something that used to just drive me bonkers. In DC, it's one of those things that happens in policy where it just kind of became a meme before there were memes about this is what we have to do, and HUD says we have to do it. HUD never said anybody had to use any particular assessment tool. And we can talk when we get into the cohorts more about assessment tools and where they came from and how kind of the misunderstanding happened. But yes, absolutely. This one is false. You are required to use some kind of assessment and demonstrate that you're doing some kind of assessment process to figure out who is getting access to the scarce resources that you're offering through your coordinated entry system.
Yeah, and I think, Mindy, that one is quite interesting. For me personally, I come from a community where we never use the VI SPDAT.
Yeah.
So we only use the customized assessment. And so when I started getting around other communities and kind of hearing that, I was like, well, we're not out of compliance. So
yeah, but you also were calling it HEMIS, so
this is also true. Yeah, no, this is also true, which should be required, but that's another
That will be required by HUD. Well, that's coming up. Okay, the next one. Let's see. Most folks, yeah, I got this one correct. Who is prioritized for housing today might change tomorrow in a coordinated entry system. This one, Christiana, you're so great at talking about dynamic prioritization. So give us a little riff on that one to get us started.
Sure. So prioritization is split up between two models. There's static prioritization and dynamic prioritization. And they're pretty, I guess, self-explanatory by the title, right? Like static means that it stays the same. So in a static prioritization model or scheme, basically whoever is on your list today that's prioritized for housing would be the same that's prioritized tomorrow, would be the same that's prioritized a month from now, until something kind of like shook that up, right? But we know that that's not the case in our communities. When we're doing assessments, it's live, it's active. When we're prioritizing folks and putting them on, whether it's a by name list or an all client list, whatever it is that it's called within your community, we know that that's changing on a day-to-day basis. So whoever might be at that top of the list, depending on how you guys have determined prioritization, that will change. And so that's the reason why for anybody that's in like the provider section, it's difficult to even tell people where they sit, right? Because where they sit today might not necessarily be the same tomorrow, but it also impacts your referrals, it impacts how you're communicating, even placement options and things of that nature. Because again, if who is prioritized changes, then even what's available for those individuals will change as well too.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and again, join us, register for any and all of the training series, the cohorts, because we'll spend a lot of time, especially in the second one, talking about understanding and doing deeper dives and really getting responsive with our prioritization processes. Okay, final one, the coordinated entry process creates housing. Most of you got that one. Absolutely, that is false. It does not create housing. It is a process whereby we are assigning folks to our housing resources that we have in our community. You guys did great. This is really great for us. It's good to see that we have so much knowledge, and it gives us a good idea about what we really want to hit hard when we do our training series. Okay, Shavana, next slide. Okay. Again, those of you who have heard me talk about this, I always like to go all the way back, like to the way back. And that's why do we do coordinated entry anyway? Especially, this is a good conversation to have for folks who maybe haven't been working in the homelessness field as long. For folks who have been doing this a long time, like I have, you can probably remember the bad old days. The way that we used to, the way that people used to get into housing if they were experiencing homelessness was it was very much on a program by program basis. And the programs were first come and first served. We often had really high barriers to entry, and whether or not you got into a program and you got a housing resource would often depend on the people who had the least barriers being able to access, and also just a matter of luck about getting in. What ended up happening was in almost all communities, this would leave out the people who were most vulnerable. So the people who had really high barriers to stability, often people with serious mental illnesses, very strong substance use issues, often co-occurring. You guys all know this, you see this in your communities now, but those are the folks who in those days were never, ever, ever getting into programs. And this often had disparate impacts by race, by disability, especially in our communities. This also ended up being a really inefficient way to use our really scarce homelessness resources, especially the most expensive resource, which is PSH. So you would also often have a matching of somebody who maybe didn't even really need a rest of their life with 24/7 access to services resource like PSH is, right? That was being matched with PSH, and then somebody who really did need that resource, and but for that resource would almost certainly never be able to end her homelessness. It was a mismatch there. So coordinated entry came about as a way to try to solve that problem and to do it at a system level instead of this kind of program by program level. Next slide, and this one's Christiana.
So as Mindy mentioned, the goal was to now start systematizing our approach to community level services. And so when you think about what coordinated entry is, it's a system. And so as any system, it's not perfect. It is flawed, but essentially it was created to really create like a flow, right? And so the way that I usually like to describe coordinated entry is that it's really the system by which individuals experiencing homelessness enter and exit our system. However, we know that sometimes that isn't necessarily how things go. And so we have to start looking at who is most vulnerable, who is first served. How can we create a system in which our most vulnerable are being the first ones to be served, right? And so who are the people that need those resources that are scarce? Who are the people that may not necessarily be able to show up if a call out for housing was put up, right? Who are the people that you might need to go search for and deploy an outreach team to kind of gather and get? And so when you're thinking about coordinated entry again, it will technically be subjective based on your community, because what is needed within your system is different than what's needed in a different system. What's needed at your community level is different than what's needed at another community level. And so therefore the onus does kind of go back to the local body. Right. And so it is something that is, yes, it sits up here, it's regulated, it's designed and even emphasized by our federal partners at HUD. However, how it moves and how it acts operationally within your system will really be based on local decisions. And so Housing First, does anybody not know what Housing First is? Please drop that in the chat and we can define it. But so with Housing First is definitely a component of coordinated entry, right? And so again, it goes back to that definition of who is most vulnerable. Housing First says that housing comes first, and it's not based on who is most desirable in a housing project, for lack of a better word, but it's really based on who needs housing, right? And so the goal of coordinated entry also too is to create a system by which people don't necessarily have to change their being, their lives, their circumstances, or be housing ready in order to actually move into a housing unit that's available within the community. We already talked about vulnerability and how that really would be subjective to a community. And so we'll talk a little bit more about this too in our assessment and prioritization cohort. We'll really give a deep dive. There's a really cool tool that Homebase created around designing an assessment and prioritization scheme and having those conversations at a local level that can help you determine who's most vulnerable and help you design a custom tool that really is suitable to your needs as a community. And so we'll be diving deep into that in cohort 2. So please show up for that if you're interested in just having that conversation about assessment and prioritization. But again, the goal is to not just house people, but to make sure that they stay housed, to provide stability in their housing situations, and then to also make sure that how they're getting housed, how housing referrals are being made is equitable within the system, right? And so you want to see that those that are experiencing housing at a certain rate are getting housed at that same rate. And so that that gets into like system flow and all of those evaluation metrics and things of that, which again, will be discussed in cohort 2. And so we already also talked about how housing resources are scarce. And so this is also, again, just a more efficient way of moving things along and making sure that things go where they need to go. And I would be interested actually in hearing, based on what we've covered so far, just drop in the chat if there's anything specific that is highlighted to you. Is there anything that you feel like you haven't heard before? Is there anything specific that is really standing out to you based on what Mindy and I have talked about so far? Super interested in hearing from you guys on that. And I think we're good to go to the next slide now.
Yeah. Okay, so Again, this is why we're here today. We really want you guys to register for, participate as much as you can in these great training cohorts that HCD is offering about coordinated entry. So as we talked about, we have 3 cohorts, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each one, a little more about each one now. The first series starts next week. Woohoo! And that is the 101. It's kind of coordinated entry fundamentals. This is really for thinking about, are you kind of a smaller staffed COC? Do you have new staff on your COC? That is probably all COCs, because we know we just have such a high rate of turnover, and that was really amplified in the pandemic. If your COC is undergoing a leadership transition, or you know what, if you've just been doing this a while and you're like, I just need to touch base about the basics. It is open to everybody, but it's really going to be really focused on the fundamental. So we're looking at the basics and the outlines, and there's an overview of coordinated entry starting the first week. Then we'll get into some issues around governance. Then the next week, kind of talk about access issues, how people enter the system, including how to make sure that we have equitable access, access point examples, how prevention and diversion kind of fits into that whole scheme. Then we talk about prioritization and assessment, following the process of coordinated entry, right? The next to the last week will be about referrals and housing. And then finally, the last week will be a wrap up. So again, this is a 6-week cohort, open to everybody, but really targeted to thinking about those fundamentals of coordinated entry and really kind of getting that foundation in place. And I believe we did put the registration in. You guys will get the registration opportunity again. The links, sign up, have your staff sign up, and we can go to the next slide. So our second cohort, this will be really, really exciting for those of you who are further along or just really kind of into the more nerdy, systemy kind of stuff, which I know Christiana is so good at it. That again will start in the first week, just doing kind of an overview, introducing Casper, thinking about your data needs, that kind of stuff. Then this one is really, because it's focused on prioritization and assessment, because it's really targeted to those of you who are in COCs, who are looking at customizing, improving, really ramping up your processes on prioritization and assessment. We're going to spend 2 weeks each on both prioritization and on assessment. So again, this one is kicking off with kind of the overview, 2 whole weeks on prioritization, 2 whole weeks on assessment, and then the wrap up there. Again, everyone is welcome to register to be a part of this, but it's really, really targeted information relating to those prioritization and assessment processes. Okay, third slide. Now, this one is not baked yet, because we are hoping you guys are going to help us bake this. I see Christiana in the chat, fellow data nerds, definitely want you guys on that call. Then we'll have our final cohort. This will start in April. Again, these all are going to happen on Tuesdays at 2. But special topics. So these are going to kind of be one-off, maybe 2-off in some situations. But if you have questions about kind of advanced operations, if you want to be thinking about things like regional prioritization, thinking about how to serve really rural or really dispersed geographies. But we're going to break, we don't have actual sessions for you yet, because we want to get your input about what you want these to be, and also the input from you guys as you're participating in the first 2 cohorts about where you really struggle, or where there's some really great ideas bubbling up from the work that you all are doing in your communities. So again, this will be 6 weeks. So there's 6 in the cohort, but they're all kind of standalone, although we could anticipate having some that are like a 2-week thing. And then Christiana, I think the next slide is yours, and you're going to lead us in an activity to just start to get some input from you guys about what these might be.
Awesome. And do we have a poll for this one? or should conversation be directed to the chat?
I thought there was a poll,
Okay.
the open-ended questions poll.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. All right. So as Kristen is getting the poll
There we
up,
go.
perfect. Awesome. It's here. All right. So as Mindy was mentioning, we want to hear from you. Tell us what you need. And so this, again, the special topics cohort will really be designed for you and by you. And so whatever it is that you guys mentioned, we'll kind of take it back to our brainstorming sessions and try to pull content that fits your need. We really want this to target some of the more nuanced topics within coordinated entry that might be region specific, that might be COC specific, that might just affect the state of California at large as well too. And so we really want to get into the weeds with you guys. And so some potential options or potential ideas that can come out could be evaluating assessment tools. And so, yes, we're going to be using Casper, that custom tool, to talk about how to get to a point of designing a custom tool. But what happens when you have a tool and you want to see if it actually is doing what it is intended to do, right? How can you ensure that it's actually meeting the needs of your people? And so that could be an idea, and maybe we can go even deeper into that and not just talk about how to get to the place of the tool, but even beyond, once you already have that established customized tool, how do you do continued quality improvement on it as well too. Another idea could be how diversion and prioritization fit within or without coordinated entry. Being that we kind of could have done a little bit better on that one in the true and false. Maybe that's a topic that we cover. And so that also kind of ties into some other ideas that we were thinking through too, which is just how coordinated entry interacts with other systems, right? In some communities, maybe they have a partner that's a hospital, and maybe that partner is funding permanent supportive housing projects or rapid rehousing projects. And so how can your coordinated entry system integrate with other systems like the healthcare system or the youth system, for example, the foster care system, as folks are aging out of foster care. And so kind of think about some other systems that are local and pertinent to your community's needs too. And maybe that could be a topic that we talk about too. Ensuring equitable access and coordinated entry is a biggie, right? I'm sure we have all seen just the push for racial equity within our homeless response systems, particularly in coordinated entry systems. And so one of the reasons why we pull away from the VI SPDAT is because we can see that it's in some situations, it doesn't create for an equitable outcome, right? And so the goal is to really have a system, again, that the folks that are identified as homeless within your system are the same folks that are getting housed, and those rates are kind of analogous. And so we can kind of talk about that from a programmatic standpoint. We can talk about that from a data standpoint, if we want to dive into some of the ways that we can talk about that too. And so again, these are just ideas. And so please feel free to drop any other ideas that come to your mind in the poll. Mindy, do you have any other that are readily coming to your mind?
No, those were, we saw Michael talked about the TAY CES at cohort 3, and we are noting that. And again, any special populations considerations with special populations, anything you guys have, just dump those ideas in there. Obviously, we only have 6 sessions, so we won't get to all of them. But for example, in something like when, Michael, that just made me think of like, okay, you're talking about TAY, but then let's also think about other special populations, right? Considerations around special populations. If you live in a COC where young people have a completely separate CES, that's a thing, right? But then if you don't, like, how do we make sure that the CES that exists is responsive to any particular special needs that young people might have, right? So that could be a whole other topic. Yeah, please share your ideas and thoughts. Kristen, are we close to being done on that poll? Nice. Veronica in the chat is talking about rural areas too. Yeah, that's a really important consideration. Okay.
Awesome.
We will look forward. I can't actually see the entries, so we'll look forward to seeing those and going through those. I don't know if Kristen or Chris or somebody, if you want to copy and paste and put those in the chat and we can talk about them later. However, most importantly, right now, the big thing we need to know from you guys is on the next slide.
Take us there, Shavana.
Okay, you all have experienced the joy of compliance chicken. Now we're going to ask you to help us vote for coordinated entry cat. Now, I will show you someone who did not make the cut to be coordinated entry cat. That's Rock right there. And those of you who are on all our various webinars over the last couple of years know my two white deaf cats. Rock's brother Hunter made the cut, and you see him there in his holiday sweater. We also have Mouse, who is my girlfriend's cat, and his little snake that he loves. Pickles is a beautiful little girl who lives in Connecticut now. And Rogue is the wonderful Chris Pitcher's cat. And he has the blurp going, which is one of our favorite things that cats do. And now we would like for you all to vote for your choice for coordinated entry cat. And we're going to use coordinated entry cat just like compliance chicken. When we move forward in these cohorts, coordinated entry cat will pop up when there's a really important thing to think about or pay attention to, or sometimes just to have a little comic relief. So give us your vote. Wait a minute, Chris Pitcher, host and panelists can't vote? Ah,
that is correct.
I needed to vote for Hunter. Okay. All right, everybody. This is really important. We really want your input here, and we're going to actually go with this. Tuesday, I know, but you have to pick one. Just close your eyes and like click and just see what happens.
There is no right answer, except when there is.
Well, except for Hunter, but I'm biased, so.
Right. And Chris is going to say we, so. Pickles.
I worry that Rogue is too deceptive to actually be useful in the presentation, so I'm actually not going to believe that.
All right, we got a winner.
Oh, is that the end of it? Did it get done?
Yeah, it got done. Can you see it, Mindy?
Wow, what a surprise. Coming
Pickles
from behind and out of the
wonderful.
blue, it's Pickles.
Under
What?
cat, I guess you would say.
Wow, my friend Jackie is going to be so proud. Thank you, everybody. Pickles. Yes, Pickles is in. She is a goofball. Jackie and I have that friendship where it's just like 40 times a day we're sending pictures of our cats back and forth, and literally thousands of cat pictures, the same cat pictures over and over on our phones. So Jackie is going to be thrilled that Pickles is now California HCD ESGCV famous, more than any cat could hope for. Thank you all. Look forward to seeing more of Pickles. And I am going to go soothe Hunter. He will be so sad that he lost, but he's going to get some treats, so he'll be okay. Next slide.
All right. And that is it for us. And so we definitely appreciate you guys spending time with us and talking through coordinated entry with us. This was fun. This was great. And so if you enjoyed this today, there will be more. And so please go on those links and register for sure. Again, you are free to sign up for multiple cohorts if you would find all of the information valuable. And we appreciate you guys even providing input on the special topics cohort. And we can't wait to just dive in and even flesh that out a little bit more and get to that. So thank you guys for joining us. Mindy, do you have any last words or closing remarks?
No, I think we might have, Chris, are we doing a kind of Q&A or conversation? I think we still have time.
Yes. Thank you, Christiana and Mindy. Very informative. Mindy, I was going for Hunter as well, but I could not.
Thank you, Shavana. Thank you for your loyalty.
You're
Hunter
welcome.
and I appreciate it.
Chris, do we have any questions?
Just a few questions that have already been answered in the chat that I'll just go ahead and just repeat so folks have it. There was a question about recordings. Yeah, we will record the CES cohort sessions and we'll send them out. But if you don't register, you probably won't get the recordings. So that's important enough to register so that you get that. There is now a question from Veronica. Shivani, you can take it from there.
Chris, I'm sorry, I can't see the
Oh,
chat.
you can't see the chat. I can. Maybe I'll see this at you or Christiana, whoever. How is this opportunity different from HUD SNAP's TA community workshop on coordinated entry, prioritization, and assessment?
That is a very good question. That's actually a great question. So the community workshop model is a little bit different than this, right? And so community workshops is something that goes through the HUD regional team structure, and it is designed to be a working group. So it's technically not a webinar. It's technically not a session to just show up to. It's something where you kind of get homework. There's some action items afterwards, and you're doing you're choosing individuals within your community that are as front facing to the work as possible and would be able to do the work within that community workshop. And so, for example, if you have a team of 4 on your coordinated entry team, perhaps you send them to the TA, to the SNAPS workshops. Whereas if you have other individuals within your community that just need to know about coordinated entry, they can come here. So the community workshops have a cap as to how many people within a community can participate, whereas these sessions do not have that sort of cap. And so you can kind of, even if you're already choosing to go through that, this can be supplemental to that, I would say. And you can kind of take some of this learning and some of the ideas that are generated in this cohort, which again is specific to California, the state of California, and you can bring some of those ideas to the community workshop model and to the work that's being done there. And so I would say that's how I would think about it. But Chris, do you have any other thing to add to that, or any other way that folks should think about community workshops versus this statewide cohort?
I think the only thing I'd add is, I've done community workshops. I have done these cohorts in the state of California. We're going to be much more focused on California. And when we're not working for HUD, we can say some things that otherwise we might not be able to say. And that's what we like to do within this work within the state of California, is be as authentic and really tell you the things that maybe HUD wouldn't endorse or can't say, but we can say it here. So we might be a little bit more frank. And I think there's going to be a lot more opportunities for peer sharing amongst California communities too, which is when you're going to the national stage, it's some California communities, but you're going to have all those other states.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point too.
Veronica has a very specific question about the VI that's old. I think we probably answered it, but I'm going to bring it up again just in case. How would people get prioritized for housing if they are not using the VI SPID Act?
So, like we talked about, let's go into the Wayback Machine. The VI SPID is one of many tools that was designed to think about, as a case management tool, how vulnerable someone is, in this case, literally to dying, right? So there was a vulnerability that you were assessing there. It was never meant to be, I'm doing this assessment, and then this score is what people have to get into this type of housing. It ended up becoming that for various human me kind of reasons, but that's not what it was intended to do. It is what a lot of communities ended up doing, and I think it's just because it's you guys have so much work that you're doing, and there's so much going on, and this work is so hard, and there's so many crises happening all throughout the day. It's just you want, give me something that's easy to do and let me do it and then be done, right? And that is totally understandable. So first of all, it's just this issue that it never had to be specifically that tool. Also, that tool was not designed to do the thing that most people ended up doing with it. But the problem we were trying to solve for those of us who were using that tool or any other assessment tool is this really hard question of, I have this resource. It's a very scarce resource. In the case of PSH, pretty expensive resource and an intensive resource. And we want to make sure that it is going to the people who, but for this intervention, probably would never be able to end their homelessness. And how do we figure that out, right? So that's the problem we're trying to solve with an assessment tool. Now, that tool can be whatever you as a community decide you want it to be. And there are many more options than VI-SPDAT. Like Christiana talked about, they never used VI-SPDAT there at all. And you guys have the freedom to do that. So I think for those of you in California who are not using it, who may have never used it, who used it and then changed to something else, your input in these cohorts will be really valuable. We'll talk about this in all of the cohorts. It just comes up over and over again because it's such an important part of the coordinated entry process. So even if it's not a formal training on assessment, it's still so much part of the process that it comes up and we have to have this conversation about it. Veronica, I think, how would people get prioritized for housing? It would be kind of the same thing where you're coming up with, as a community, you're deciding, these are the factors that we as a community have decided we're going to use to determine who is prioritized for what. In most communities, a lot of communities, I won't say most, but in a lot of communities, people use the SPDAT score as a thing that made sense for, like, okay, if it's a score like this, then they get prioritized for that. If it's a score like this, then they get prioritized for that. That maybe made some sense. And maybe it still kind of works in your community. It's really important to figure out from an equity perspective whether or not the results of doing it that way had an equitable outcome. In a lot of communities, it did. In some communities, it didn't. So there's always these questions we want to ask about the tools that we're using, that one or any other one, or any other assessment process that we're doing, or prioritization process that we're doing, to make sure that it ends up being fair in its outcomes too.
Well, one of the things we talked about, Mindy, in the coordination or organization of this, and this was pretty universal across the team, is if we had it to do over, we would do, 3 or 4 questions, not 30 or 40.
Right.
That's something that I think we're
Yeah.
starting to see the industry turn towards, like, oh, we don't have to be this complicated. Okay.
Yes.
I think it's a really interesting thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tabitha, for we know it wasn't we know it wasn't Veronica now, but
okay.
That's
yeah,
funny.
Tabitha, and it may be that. And Chris, that's really important point there, is because the SPDAT was a case management tool, that level of conversation with somebody makes sense in a case management context, right? But not in an assessment for housing context. It's just, but it's kind of how it happened, and it rolled out that way, and now we're thinking about it differently. So thank you for that question. It's really important conversation.
And just one thing to add to that too, this came out in, again, our coordination conversations. And I really liked something, Mindy, that you said, and you said it's not the tool, but it's how you administer it. Right. And so your tool can have 3 questions or 40 questions, right? But if you don't have a good schema as to how that score, that tool is going to translate into equitable housing outcomes, it doesn't matter what tool you use. And so again, just plug in cohort 2. A lot of that will be discussed there too. But I thought that was just something really valuable that you mentioned, Minnie, that I wanted to make sure was highlighted.
Any other questions? Conversations? Can't wait to see you all on the cohorts. I think, Christiana, it's me and you again next week, right?
I think so.
Yes.
With pickles, yes.
I gotta email Jackie right now and be like, send me your best pickles pictures. And of course, there are thousands.
Well, we're not seeing any more questions, so I think we can go ahead and wrap. Thank you, Mindy. Thank you, Christiana. Shivani, you want to take us out?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Again, thank you, Christiana and Mindy, for a very informative session, and we're looking forward to the next. As a reminder, a survey will pop up as you exit the session. Please be sure to answer so that we'll know the types of trainings that you're interested in receiving. Again, thank you for attending, and we'll see you next week. See you, everyone.